ask you more about
Sure.
books
Yep.
in a bit, but let's talk about the Agora Foundation.
Yep.
I'd love to know how it began and how it's evolved.
You bet. Thank you. So it started, I was actually in graduate school when it started, and it got started by this company, BST, that I worked for a long time, Tom Krause, who's the founder. He and Paul O'Reilly and Mike McLean of Thomas Aquinas College
Okay.
got together and said, let's start having great book seminars for people who are interested, who don't want to commit to going back to school. And it was called Great Book Seminars in Ojai, and it started in September of 1998.
Nice.
25 years ago.
Oh my God.
Yep. And so I missed the first one because I was coming back from graduate school. But once I found out about it, and where I went to graduate school is St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is a great books program. And I won't lose my train of thought, but a great books program essentially means everybody takes the same thing. There's no special degrees. Everybody does the same curriculum. And typically you're doing it chronologically more or less in time, but you read all the greatest books of the West is what those schools do. So anyway, I missed the first one, but when the second one came and I was back in Ojai, they asked me would I like to run it. And I said, well, yes, I'm going to attend every single one too. So we were doing a seminar about every 6 weeks at the Ojai Valley Inn. And it was, really nice and everything, but then we realized, well, the price is kind of high to make it be there and all that sort of stuff. So let's make the price be lower, have it at different locations, have a sliding scale. And I should talk a little bit about how the method works. So there is a seminar leader. This is the way the college works and all great books programs. The seminar leader they don't lecture about what the work means. They simply facilitate a conversation by asking questions. And what we say is the teacher in the room is the author. And our main job is to try to understand what the author's saying before we decide if we agree with them or that they're right or wrong. So that takes some discipline. So you're reading somebody like Sigmund Freud, okay, and you think, well, we have a long history after Sigmund Freud of some things that are provocative, some things that have been discredited, et cetera.
Right.
But you read a book by him and you think, okay, all I'm trying to do first is what is he saying? And it turns out that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And even when I was in college, but most people's experiences when they first come to Agora, they realize, wow, I don't actually know how to read. Because you read things sort of fast, you think, well, I know what this is,
yeah.
I kind of get this. And you say it back, but if you really stop and you say, and this is what they're called tutors, the seminar leaders, what the tutor is so great at, they'll ask a question. And the question might be kind of, you think seemingly kind of superficial. You think, why did they ask that question? And you start digging into it and you realize, whoa, this is the heart of the work. And by circling around this question, you get to it. And I'll use an easy example. In the Iliad by Homer, it starts off, "O Muse, sing of the wrath of Achilles." And you think, okay. And a really easy question would be, or a very common question rather, is, why is Achilles mad? You say, okay, well, why is Achilles mad? And I'm not going to get into that work, but you think, well, he's actually mad for a lot of different reasons that launch you into the work, into honor, into that society. And so we dig into the work, trying to understand what the author's saying, and we limit the conversation to the work that we have in common, and that's all.
The work that we have in common.
In other words, if I said to you, we're going to read The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, for example, that's our seminar. We don't bring in Russian literature that you have also read on the side. You might be a Russian scholar or a Russian historian.
Right.
And while a little bit of that is helpful, mostly it stops the conversation because we don't know how to respond to you because you're the expert, we're not, so there's nothing to say.
Right.
And so what the seminar leader would gently do is they'd say, oh, that's very interesting, Andra, and then they would pull it back. Or if you said, well, my grandfather says X, Y, and Z, they would say, what in the text suggests that to you? And you would go there and people write notes in their books, they dog your pages, they highlight or use a pencil, and they go, oh yeah, like on page 72 when blah, blah, blah. So it's very in the text, sort of in the weeds in that sense, to get to some of those big ideas. And so back to the question, in 1998 we were doing one about every 6 weeks, and we had teachers coming pretty regularly, and we were kind of letting them come for free because we wanted them to be there. And a typical room size is 8 to 12 is sort of ideal, so everybody can speak. And the seminars are usually 2 hours at a time. So anyway, the teachers came to us and said, if you guys become an official nonprofit, we can get grants and have teachers come for free or hire you to go be at our school. So we're like, okay,
awesome.
Makes perfect sense, let's do it. So we incorporated, and in 2006 changed the name to the Agora Foundation. And so then it sort of launched officially. So we had 8 years of doing these seminars and getting some traction there. So since 2006, the seminars increased, but in general, that's been our mode, adding us going to schools, working with either a class or a whole school. So we do that too. And the addition, we'll get to COVID in a second. In 2013, so we've been doing these seminars for a long time now, and we have a group of advisors, a bunch of great Ojai people at the time, and now we have people around the country, but they asked this question. They said, we were just in a seminar and we were talking about Thomas Aquinas's 5 proofs for the existence of God. Okay. So Thomas has these 5 proofs. Now you can decide if they're convincing or not, but we were reading these 5 proofs, and there's believers in the room and non-believers, and there's a Hindu, and all of the above. And this lady, she's so great, she just said, how is it that we can talk about Thomas's 5 proofs with a mixed group civilly, and we can't talk about GMOs without people getting rabid?
Right.
Okay, so then we thought, oh wow, she's onto something there. And it turned it to be what we call the Ojai Chautauqua, and that was Esther Wachtel's idea.
Oh, okay.
So Esther had this idea of the Chautauqua, and we said, great, let's do it. And we were kind of working with the Libby Bowl Foundation, trying to, when the bowl got rebuilt, first there was the foundation, so I was helping them out also. And we said, let's start doing these Chautauquas. And it was the same idea, which is take an idea like fracking. We say, okay, well, what would be ideal? You have an oil person, an environmentalist, a geologist, a politician, that kind of, like the whole gamut. And you have a moderated conversation with as many facts as we can get. So producing a data packet of facts. And if there's competing facts, put them both in.
Yep.
And that's been our idea. So the Chautauqua really started from the civility that we have in the seminars. And so anyway, the Agora started, just putting these Chautauquas together and all that. So the thing that happened with COVID that was so interesting and unexpected was we had a seminar planned for March of 2020 on site in this very room. And then, oh gosh, we can't do it now. Everything's closed. And so we said, well, everybody seems to be using Zoom now, so let's use Zoom. And we realized people from all over the country had been wanting to come but couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then we said, well, let's start doing online seminars. And the number of seminars we did completely jumped.
Wow.
So where we used to, in 2018, Agora became my full-time job. I had been doing it on the side for all the years up to that point. So the number of seminars went from like 18 to like 50 in 2018. But then when COVID came and we were doing them online, now we do about 250 events a year. Yeah, so we do roughly 5 to 7 a week seminars. They're only 2 hours or an hour and a half. So a typical week would be like I'll use this week or last week as an example. Tuesday night going through Middlemarch by George Eliot with the same group over 16 weeks, and then the Book of Exodus with the same group over 12 on Wednesday nights. Finnegan's Wake with a group on Wednesday afternoons, and then on the weekends typically we would have 2. So this weekend we're reading sections from the New Testament, but also Darwin's Descent of Man on Sunday.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's such wow.
Yeah, and so 2 different groups.
Yeah.
But yeah, so every weekend typically there's one on a Saturday or a Sunday. So COVID launched that, so while we will go back on site again and have already begun to do that, we will keep the online as is.
That's a positive thing that came out of COVID.
Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned some really interesting pieces of curriculum, and I'd love to know how you choose what the readings are going to be.
Britannica and the University of Chicago working together came up with this a collection of texts that was supposed to be an accompaniment to the encyclopedia that Britannica puts out. So the encyclopedia would be a collection of facts, and then the Great Book series would be a collection of wisdom or cultural tradition or something like that.
Must read for societal reasons.
Must read. So they came up with a whole collection of books, starting with Homer, right, and going to mostly the end of the 19th century. That was the first edition. The next edition went into the 20th century and all that. So they came up with a collection. I have it, and it's excellent. And they actually did something that was so fascinating for somebody like you. If you think of the Oxford English Dictionary, and they were trying to say, you know, where was this word first used, right? So imagine like a whole gymnasium of people reading through Chaucer and, you know, trying to find, oh, here's the first time I found the word.
Oh my gosh.
They did the same thing with ideas. And so they said, okay, well, let's say an idea like freedom. Mm-hmm. So if you look at, it's called the Syntopicon, so they came up with these 2 books, and there's, if I remember right, 102 subjects, and they have a very neutral few-page essay that they wrote saying, here's how the subject of freedom is written about.
Wow.
Not here's what you think, but here's how it's been written about. And then they go through the books and they say, here's what Plato says about it, here's the page numbers in the book, you would go find that piece in that book, Aristotle, going all the way to the moderns. So anyway, when we decide what are we going to read, we've got that model. Mm-hmm. We've got what St. John's and Thomas Aquinas College use, all of those great books. And essentially you can really make it easy and say a book that has been very influential not only for its time, but maybe for a long time after or even to the present day. Mm-hmm. Now that could be something that has later been proven to be wrong. An easy example would be Ptolemy, and the book is called The Almagest. So Ptolemy goes into how the planets are revolving around the Earth. Right. Okay, and there's epicycles, and you measure all that and all that. But what we do at Agora, we get to go much farther. So we take those Western books that are tried and true that everybody knows, you know, Shakespeare, Aristotle, Aquinas, all that kind of stuff, leading up to people like Einstein and things like that. But we go farther in a few ways. One is we do all of what we call the Eastern classics. Mm. So that would be, as I mentioned earlier, the Tao Te Ching, Zhuangzi, Taoist, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Arabian Nights. So we read everything that also does the same thing in their cultures too. And so what you see though is perennial questions they're called that for a reason. They're everywhere and they're all the time. They're, what's the best way to have a life? Yep. Is there an afterlife? You know, how do you get over grief? What's the best kind of society to have? What's the best government, et cetera, et cetera? All those questions are the human condition. And so we benefit a lot from that. We take it to the next step in 2 ways. One is we can take authors like Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Toni Morrison, for example, and say, they are clearly going to be in the canon someday. Right. Even if they're not yet. Yeah. Clearly, obviously, they are. So we read all of those too. Mm-hmm. So in our series, we'll always have some of those things that are more modern. Mm-hmm. And then we also have what we call a contemporary issues series, and those are things that our board and our advisors might have just some special interest, like it could be cognitive bias. So there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman. We'll read pieces of that. We're reading the genes and intimate history to understand genetics. And so you read like, oh, here's Darwin and all that work that happens up to the modern time, but here's how they discovered DNA, how they understand that DNA is the mechanism. But then you see there's all this very interesting cultural stuff like, here's how eugenics came out of that, right? In America, in Germany, of course. And so leading up to the modern time now, that kind of work, in addition to the foundational work about what does it mean to be a human, what's the value of a human, et cetera, you could also look at then, well, what a human is now becoming, not just now, it continues to be an interesting question that people keep asking as science shows us more about what material can be. So then you realize, oh wow, like, let me use a good example. If someone's trying to say, are you only a body, or is there something about you that's not body, like a soul? Right. Okay, so you say, okay, well, is there a soul? And these are kinds of questions that all these thinkers ask about. And sometimes somebody might show you a picture of yourself when you were 6. And they say, well, is this a picture of you? And you're like, yeah, that's a picture of me. And they say, well, what is it that's here, that's still here in you now?
Right.
And you go, okay, well, one answer is the soul. Okay, and that would be worth talking about, of course. And then the answer from a book like The Genes and Intimate History would be your DNA.
Right.
And so you think, oh, the DNA, it could be modified over time, let's say, but like with epigenetics and so on. But let's just say in general, the structure is there. That's the thing that is the same materially, that is being made up of new matter as new cells come to be. Then you realize that's not something that Aristotle could have said or other physical scientists, but we can say it now. And every scientist I know is very humble, and they'll say, there is a lot we do not understand.
Yep.
And I'm one of them. So we could say, we know what the mechanisms are, we know that things are the case, we don't know why they're the case.
Right.
So that's very much our group is, well, let's know as much as we can, or learn as much as we can, or ask each other as much as we can about these kinds of things, and make very interesting, also moral questions, like especially with genetics on that same subject. What is the moral principles one would use to say, in utero, you could prevent a disease by genetic modification? Why would you not do that, for example, or do it?
Right.
Or if somebody wants to be taller, why not do that?
Right.
Or whatever, pick your trait. That's the questions we're facing now. And so, anyway, so Agora gets to go into those areas too, and we do it cautiously, but we do it neutrally. So even when we read theology, we come to it as, you found this book on the beach, not with all the cultural baggage, not are you a believer or not, but just what does the book of Exodus have to say by itself, just in itself. And so all the religious texts from around the world, including like the Quran, we just say, what is the text saying by itself? Now that doesn't suit everybody.
Yeah.
But it suits us, and it suits people who are wanting to read it in a way that they can just learn as much as they can about it.